Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here and 4Ks, and today we are talking about some Scream Factory stuff, a 4K and a couple Blu-rays, recent releases. We'll start with the 4K, of course, and that being a upgrade from Scream Factory's previous release of Sam Raimi's 1990 film Darkman, starring Liam Neeson, Frances McDormand, Larry Drake, this was kind of a breakout for him. I mean, he had obviously made a name for himself with the, I guess at the time, only Evil Dead 1 and 2, because he wouldn't go on to make Army of Darkness until after this one. This is, of course, for Universal Pictures, who would make Army of Darkness. But it's one of those movies that is a big stepping stone, and obviously then later on he gets Spider-Man and, kind of restarts the whole superhero genre in a way, which I really find amusing and interesting because of, kind of how Evil Dead 1 and 2 are. Very irreverent, very stylish, with a really interesting sense of humor. Physical comedy. Raimi's got a really interesting sensibility all around, and so, he doesn't seem necessarily like a studio guy, but I think this one is fascinating because apparently Raimi had wanted to try and get the rights to The Dark Knight and could not at the time, and so just sort of came up with his own idea for a superhero, and it's... I guess the original story he had written was about a guy who could change his face, which I think is a really cool aspect of this movie. I mean, well, actually, just for those that don't know, Liam Neeson and Oscar winner Frances McDormand star in this explosive, action-packed thriller from director Sam Raimi. When the laboratory of Dr. Peyton Westlake, Neeson is blown up by gangsters. He's burned beyond recognition, altered by an experimental medical procedure. He assumes alternate identities in his quest for revenge. Colin Friels, Larry Drake, Danny Hicks, who was in Evil Dead 2, and Nicholas Worth also star. So yeah, it's a dark superhero movie. Score by Danny Elfman, which is very much like his Batman score, but a little different in parts, but feels a lot like that kind of energy, which definitely elevates the material. But anyway, so Raimi writes this story about a guy who can change his face, and the story sort of drew on elements of Phantom of the Opera, The Elephant Man, The Shadow, and just comic books in general, and it's very much a live-action comic book kind of movie, but again, in that Sam Raimi style. There's a certain over-the-top quality to it that I think is partially due to just the comic book idea in terms of the hero and the villains are very over-the-top, very just arch in some ways. Larry Drake plays Durant, and of course, this film would spawn 2 straight-to-video sequels. Larry Drake is featured prominently in those. And yeah, it's a, very interesting superhero movie for Raimi, very much like his thing, like I said. But I do love the idea that, basically he's dating Frances McDormand's character, who's a lawyer who works for a developer who's actually dirty. She finds out, and one of the key plot points is this memo that shows him paying off a bunch of, I think, city officials. And this is obviously pre-internet, so the memo itself, the actual paper memo, which even has like a coffee stain on it, is this crucial piece of evidence that the developer then sends Durant and his goons to go and find, and they find it in Neeson's laboratory, and they torture and kill him, or they try to anyway. They blow up his lab, and he's, of course, burned horribly. He's been working on this fake sort of a synthetic skin project, and he's gotten to a point where he can get it to stabilize for about 99 minutes, I think. But at that point, it just melts. It just dissolves. It becomes unstable, and he can't figure it out. And through certain accidents, he finds out that it actually, part of the problem is that the light, that it can maintain for longer in darkness, but something about the light makes it become unstable. But it sets up a really fun idea, which is that he can disguise himself as his former self. You know, even though he's fully scarred, he can recreate digital models of faces, including his old face from photographs. But he can do the same for Durant and some of the other characters in the movie. And so we do have some really enjoyable scenes of him taking on other identities, and the suspense that's involved in not only are people going to figure it out because he's acting funny, but also he's only got 99 minutes in the light to do anything before his face starts to melt off. So yeah, so it's a really fun and, you know, enjoyable comic booky superhero movie. I think made on a budget of about 18 million, returned about 48 in $1990, which is not bad. But yeah, you know, and cool to see it get this 4K upgrade. I've been struggling a lot with talking about 4K transfers lately because, you know, there are obviously channels out there that do a much more thorough job in terms of that side of the analysis. You know, they will look at bit rates, they'll do side-by-side comparisons. And I got to be honest, to my eye, sometimes some of the things they're seeing, I'm not always seeing. So it's hard for me to align myself always with, you know, bad reviews or whatever. But the one thing that you do see a lot of is people complaining about film grain being scrubbed. That is definitely not the case with this one. The film grain is present throughout. And this is a new 4K restoration from the original negative in Dolby Vision, approved by director Sam Raimi and DP Bill Pope. And so they've looked at it, and it looks good. It's got that grain, and it's got great detail, great color. So a really nice upgrade from the previous Blu-ray, I think. And it has, I don't think, any new features. I'm pretty sure all the features are being ported over from the previous release. But we do have... Oh, I'm sorry. There is a new audio commentary with filmmaker and Darkman Superfan Josh Rubin, and audio commentary with Bill Pope as well. But the Josh Rubin commentary is new. And you can listen to both of those on the 4K. This does not have reversible artwork, so the cover is the original artwork, which is fine. I'm totally down with that. But obviously you get a Blu-ray and a 4K with this. But there are some nice features, so it's not like I'm complaining there aren't too many new features. A new commentary is a nice thing to have, certainly. But this has a lot of stuff on it. So in terms of the features, it has an interview with Liam Neeson dissecting Darkman. That's about 7.5 minutes. And he talks about working with Raimi. He talks about getting the gig, how Raimi was great on set and always wore a shirt and tie out of respect for the crew, which I guess Hitchcock did that as well. He mentions that some other people were considered. I think Gary Oldman and Bill Paxton were mentioned as possibles for this. But I do believe like Neeson certainly had made it his own. And I don't know that, obviously the movie's not going to be the same with somebody else. So neat to see him reflecting on a film that I think was a big deal to him at the time. Then there's a interview with Larry Drake, who I really like a lot in interviews. Like, it's funny because he actually comments on his own persona in movies. This is about a 16-minute interview with him. The Name is Durant is the feature. I first got to know him through L.A. Law, but he played a lot of menacing villains. You have your Dr. Giggles, which is a Scream Factory release, obviously, also. And then Durant, who is just a really dark, scary, evil guy who opens the movie by snipping fingers, and you'll have to watch that scene. But it's an intense scene that really establishes who he is and that he just does not care about anybody and will kill anybody that gets in his way. Murder is just part of his everyday going to the office, basically, for him. But he's really neat because he says something like, I look like a truck driver and I talk like a school teacher, but that's very confusing to Hollywood. And so since college, I've played big and dumb, big and funny, or big and mean. And it's interesting because he's right. I always think of him as one of those three things, really. But he's very well-spoken, very intelligent, just comes off completely differently than any character you'd ever play. Not that that's a surprise. Most actors do, but because I'm so used to the characters he's played that are very much different from him, it's, I don't want to say a shock, but it's fascinating to watch and listen to him talk about his career, and he's a really neat guy, and I really enjoyed the interview with him. Fascinating story about his audition with Sam Raimi, where he actually asked him to play one of the scenes where there are two Durants, and how he had to sort of jump back and forth across the room. But that he said he wasn't that well prepared for that audition, but for whatever reason, I guess his winging it was enough to appeal to Raimi that he got the gig, which is great because I do think a movie like this lives or dies by, the villain. You got to have a good villain. If you don't have a good villain, the movie suffers for sure. And he's pretty sharp. And apparently Raimi and his producer hadn't seen L.A. Law, so they didn't have any bias against him. And I guess it was a little bit of a studio fight because of his L.A. Law character and reputation. Like, can we cast this guy? Anyway, glad he got cast. It's a nice interview. There's The Face of Revenge with makeup designer Tony Gardner. That's about 13 minutes, 21 seconds. He had worked with Raimi on Evil Dead 2. And Gardner's resume is pretty incredible. I mean, he works on Nightbreed, Swamp Thing, Freaked. If you haven't seen Freaked, that's an incredible example of, physical makeup. And then, of course, he'd work on Army of Darkness. But I think for me, one of the big ones that he did is The Blob, the 1988 Blob, which to this day, even though I've heard some of the effects explained, there's cloth involved and things, I still can't believe what he pulled off with The Blob. So he'll always have my respect for that. But the effects in this are really well done. A lot of crazy, gory, gross makeups. Darkman himself is kind of like a mummy, but when he loses his bandages, his face is completely, decayed. His jaw is exposed. It's pretty gnarly stuff. And so it's, and I do think that's kind of a funny, I would like to think that it's Raimi's sense of humor in a way. Like his superhero is just a gnarly looking, mummy dude, as opposed to like a Superman chiseled type, that just seems to line up for him. But anyway, great effects, and interesting to hear Tony Gardner talk about how some of that stuff was done. There's another interview called Henchman Tales, which is about 13 minutes. And there's interviews with Dan Bell, who plays Smiley, one of the henchmen. He's the long-haired one. And Danny Hicks, who is from Evil Dead 2. And you'll recognize him. You're like, oh, I know that guy from Evil Dead 2. He plays Skip, who's a one-legged... Well, he's got a fake leg. And that's actually kind of a plot point in the first scene, which is kind of fun. And, they just talk about, again, their auditions and their memories of the film, how bad guys make good guys better and such. And it's neat to hear them going through their, memories of the movie. Then there's something called Dark Design, which is about 16 minutes, 46 seconds. Interviews with both production designer Randy Sayre, I think is his name, and art director Philip Dagort. And they talk about Raimi's inspirations for the film coming from comic books, but the real dark ones, and Universal Horror as well. He's definitely trying to throw back to, the old Universal Horror films in some sense. The Black Cat is mentioned, the Karloff film, and what it means to have sort of this filmic vision of a live-action comic book, how that would translate in terms of romance, horror, and action. And so it's neat to hear them go through And there's even like some set design stuff, like that one of them still has an old model from the set, that one of the sets he designed. But I love this kind of stuff. I mean, this is all about the collaboration of filmmaking and how production design is a huge part of it. That's not, I don't want to say invisible, certainly it's noticeable, but it's there to elevate everything else and not always call attention to itself. And so there's a real art form to it. And I love to hear art directors and production designers talk about their craft. There's also an interview with Frances McDormand. It's about almost 11 minutes. She's talking about how she had the good fortune of sharing a home with Joel and Ethan Coen and Sam Raimi in Silver Lake, California, circa 1988, and how she was working as a word processor for an organization that answered mail for AC/DC, apparently. But she was trying out acting, and Raimi, I think, liked her work, she says, and also wanted to help her pay her rent, which was also his rent. So, it was I guess a natural thing for him to put her in the mix. And she also said something about how he had taken some heat for his portrayals of women in the Evil Dead films and how he wanted to rectify that by writing a very strong female character for this movie, which she is. And part of the tension lies in the fact that she's so strong that she's going to get herself in trouble with these bad people. And so that's a great dramatic device for the movie. But she's great in the movie. Neat to see her and Neeson together. But a great interview with her. Then we have some vintage, like archival featurettes. There's an EPK featurette, about 6.5 minutes, with Raimi, Neeson, McDormand, Drake, and Raimi talking about it being an old monster movie, a Beauty and the Beast story. It's kind of your typical fluffy studio featurette EPK kind of thing. And then there's cast and crew interviews, which are 9 minutes. Each one sort of broke. So there's, again, Raimi, Neeson, McDormand, Drake. I think they all get a separate interview. And some of those clips are then used in that EPK. So you see some of that stuff repeated. But a nice, archival thing to have. And then there's like 37 minutes of deleted scenes. So a lot of material left on the cutting room floor to examine through the Blu-ray and the 4K. I guess all these features that I'm talking about would be on the Blu-ray. Only the commentaries are on the 4K. But a really nice release for Raimi fans. Again, a wonderful picture upgrade for this 4K. So this is definitely a recommend from me if you are a Darkman person. A few more that I picked up. The Terminal Man. This one starring George Segal. And it is based on Michael Crichton, a novel by Michael Crichton, produced and directed by Mike Hodges, who did Get Carter. But this one's fascinating because it also stars some cast members from The Thing, which I always notice when they're in. Richard Dysart, and I want to say, there's one more in here that I'm blanking on. That is in the Thing cast, and they're doctors in this, and it's especially seeing Dysart by an operating table. I'm immediately like get the warm fuzzies because it just makes me think of The Thing. But anyway, so the idea is that George Segal plays a character, a guy who has had a car accident, and he's had some brain damage that causes him to have these attacks, sort of like seizures, where he blacks out and just goes into these violent fits. And he's actually injured people and been arrested. And so he is sort of, I guess not recruited, but found out by this medical company who's working on a new idea or several new kind of technologies that help with this kind of thing. At one point there's a character quoting about how these kind of accidents happen all the time and things go unnoticed, that people got this kind of brain damage. And I guess, I don't know. Anyway, so they bring him in to have this surgical procedure where they're going to put electrodes into his brain that in theory will stop him from having these attacks, these blackouts. They'll trigger responses or stop the brain from doing what it's doing. That's the idea. But there's something interesting about these 70s sci-fi movies because they're very talky. Like the first 50 minutes of this hour and 44-minute movie is about the setup. You know, the we don't get to see him having an attack. And in fact, it's handled in a way that I really like in movies, which is people looking at photographs. I know this sounds weird, but I've seen some stuff recently, just some random scenes of people where you would have maybe a montage. Instead, it's somebody flipping through photographs, and it works like a montage. So in this case, the doctors are looking through photographs of him and his family, his mugshot or whatever, and you get a sense of his history that's explained, but it's done in this visual way that's interesting. So it's all this setup, and then the surgery. Michael C. Gwynn, an actor I really like from a movie called Payday, is one of the doctors as well. But so they put the electrodes in. Does it work? It does not work. Slight spoiler. And he gets away, and then it becomes a really interesting... He escapes the hospital, that is. It becomes a really interesting thriller in that they can see almost like, you know, if like seismologists were looking at earthquake signs of an earthquake coming, they can see when he's going to have his next attack. And instead of stopping it, the electrodes are making it worse. So basically he's out there, and when he has an attack, he's going to just tear up whatever he's in, and he will harm anyone that's around him at that time. And he's just wandering through the city. So you're just kind of watching him, and they're like, yeah, he's going to have his next attack at 6 a.m. And it's just like, oh my God, where is he? Who is he going to hurt? Jill Clayburgh is a friend of his. I guess he's sort of having an affair with. I can't remember if he's separated from his wife or what his deal is, but she's a dancer, I think. So she gets put in harm's way, and you're like, what'll happen to her and all this? But it's interesting, you know. And Siegel's had his head shaved for the surgery, so he's wearing this kind of ridiculous wig once he's escaped, and so it's kind of silly in that sense. But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like something like Coma, you know, again, that's a Crichton film, not his own text, but these 70s thrillers of the time, this has this sci-fi angle to it that's fascinating. Anyway, this one has not been available in HD, even to stream, as far as I know, in recent memory. So this is a nice Blu-ray transfer of it. There are no features, sadly. I would love to have had some features. Obviously, George Siegel's no longer with us, but anyone they could have talked to, I would have loved to. Joan Hackett also stars as a psychologist who works at the hospital. I'm a big fan of Joan Hackett, and she is very much like, I don't know about this whole procedure. I'm just not sure. And of course, she's right. But yeah, it's Donald Moffat. That's the other guy I was trying to think of from The Thing. He's in this as well. Anyway, so this is a new Scream Factory release, a nice transfer, no extras, but still a good 70s sci-fi thriller. And then lastly, we have Funeral Home, a.k.a. Cries in the Night, I think, is the alt title. And I think that's the title on the print that they use for this. This one is one that I had meant to see for a long time. It's a sort of a slasher from the golden period. This is from 82. And it's... Does it have... Yeah, it does have the alternate artwork for Cries in the Night as well. It's interesting. It's a little different than your traditional slasher in some sense, although it's not like a movie we've never seen before. Young and easily frightened Heather, Leslie Donaldson from Happy Birthday to Me, she's also in Deadly Eyes, which I'm a huge fan of, is called to stay with her grandmother in the hopes of helping her turn an old funeral home into a bed and breakfast. But strange happenings and unexplained murders around the home quickly make this vacation spot a dead and breakfast. I see what they did there. It is up to Heather to investigate the eerie and creepy corners of the former funeral home to unlock a decades-old secret. Will she survive long enough to solve the mystery? So yeah, I mean, that is the setup. It's a remote town. Her grandmother is nice but a little strange, and she's talking to somebody in the basement, and we don't know what that's about. And there's a big ending for the movie that's interesting and Definitely rivals some other films, which I'm definitely not going to reference in any way. But maybe worth it for the ending. Maybe. It's a little slow to start, I'll say that. But it does set up a nice atmosphere. Leslie Donaldson is a good lead. She just has a great ability to look scared, to just do this sort of wide-eyed, oh no, sort of look on her face. Like, she can go into that 2 seconds flat, and she's great. So nice to finally see this one and sort of check it off my list, my 80s slasher list. I know I have some friends that are big fans of this one, so it was nice to get a chance to check it out finally. They did put some features on here, some nice stuff. New audio commentary of film historians Jason Pachonsky and Paul Korup. I'm a huge Paul Korup fan. He of Conexploitation.com. Just a great cinema dude. And this, I guess, has Canadian roots. Maybe it was shot in Canada. I don't even know. New isolated score selections and audio interview with music historian Douglas Fake. New audio interviews with actor Leslie Donaldson, first assistant director Ray Sager, and production assistant Shelley Allen. And new Secrets and Shadows interview with director of photography Mark Irwin. That definitely lets me know it's Canadian because Mark Irwin shot a lot of movies for Cronenberg. New Dead and Breakfast interviews with art director Susan Longmire and set assistant Eleanor Galbraith. And new family-owned and operated interview with Brian Allen, president of Premier Drive-In Theaters, as well as new original filming location footage, plus TV spots, etc. So, yeah, if you're an 80s slasher fan and okay with a slow burn and some nice creepy atmosphere, Funeral Home may be up your alley. So, anyway, I wanted to throw that into the mix while I was talking Scream Factory. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.